All right, guys. I just want to dedicate this year to the two very important people. And this is not in order of importance, but merely in the order of which I owe them a character tov. So the first part of the share, well, the entire share is dedicated to firstly Mickey Davidow, who was my sensei in martial arts for many years, and he was not only a martial arts teacher, but he taught me many, many life lessons, and I owe him a tremendous amount of gratitude. So I just wish his son Selwyn long life. That's the first thing I wanted to say. The second long life I wanted to wish is to Abigail Sher and Debbie Lang, and in addition to that, to Marcel, poor Reuben's late wife, because Abigail and Ezra Sher are very good friends of mine, and it's Abigail Sher's father's Yortzeit, whose Hebrew name is Yehuda Leib ben Noach, and it was poor Reuben that passed away. So, to both families, my absolute condolences. Um, I know, Lance, your internet is a bit unstable at the moment, so I won't be asking you any questions. So every day you can tell me it's unstable, and then you're off the hook. All right, I'm going to share the Mishnah, and it's
And
appropriate that
in,
we're doing
and
the
in my
Mishnah.
case, I'm unstable, so every day also don't ask me.
So we're doing a Mishnah which is appropriate because the Hebrew letters of Mishnah and Neshama are shared, and it is customary to share a Mishnah in the merit of those that have passed on. So the first bit that we're going to share in the Mishnah before we hit the Gemara is as follows. Okay, so we're dealing with Makkos, corporal punishment, and cross testimony of false witnesses. So we're in the eighth daf, and we in 8a1. If a person threw a stone into a public area and killed a bystander, he is exiled. Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov said, if it was after the stone left the thrower's hand that the victim thrust his head out in the stone's path and caught the blow, the thrower is exempt, and obviously under those circumstances. Um, Now, just as a matter of interest, uh, when we say exempt, we're certainly not saying that it doesn't have to have an atonement basis, but certainly not from the city of exile, because there was no negligence whatsoever. It was a complete accident. If a person threw a stone in his own yard and killed, if the victim had permission to enter there, he's exiled, but if not, the thrower is not exiled. As it says, or whoever came with his fellow man into the forest. Um, so the Torah chose that particular pasuk of the forest to teach that just as a forest is a place where both the perpetrator and the victim have a right to enter, so to any public place where an inadvertent killing takes place, where both the perpetrator and the victim have a right to enter in order for there to be a law of exile. So what that's saying is that even if it was accidental, but you are partaking in a hazardous activity, even with a small amount of risk, there's a certain degree of negligence. If it's gross negligence and you're firing a weapon, therefore you don't even deserve protection of refuge from the city of exile, nor do you deserve the refuge from the Goel Adam, the victim's relatives. And the Mishnah continues, this excludes from the possibility of exile the owner's yard, where there's no permission for the victim to enter. So obviously, uh, where another person has no right to enter, there's certainly no culpability whatsoever. So let's just go on now that we've shared that particular Mishnah. There's a second part. And Abba Shmuel says that the example of a person chopping wood in a forest teaches us something else. Just as chopping wood is a voluntary act, so to any act causing death must be a voluntary act in order for the law of exile to apply. Because What this means is that you've done it of your own volition. And if you're doing a particular mitzvah, and that mitzvah which Hashem commanded you to do, which is not hazardous but has an element of risk, in the process of doing a Mishnah, you're exempt from the city of exile. It uses the example in the Mishnah of the father who hits his son and inadvertently kills him. Now, before you talk about abuse and human rights, we'll get to that. We're talking about a father reproves the son and gives him a clap, but certainly doesn't beat him. But obviously, it ends off in a fatality. And the same is true with a teacher who chastises his pupil and inadvertently kills him. And the agent of the court who inadvertently kills somebody in the performance of his duty, all of these killed while performing a mitzvah. So any act undertaken while performing a mitzvah, you don't go to the city of refuge if damage occurs as a result. So at this point, before we get into the Gemara, I just want to cover one particular issue. Is that in the commentaries on Tosfot, now I don't know if you know that Tosfot wasn't one person. Uh, Gavin Simpson, you want to explain to the group, because you know the different compositions of what comprises of Tosfot. I'm giving you the floor.
Yeah, there's numerous commentaries. So it's not just one particular person named Tosfot. There's swarms. I'm not sure. I think it's Rafi's grandchildren as well, composed of the Tosfots and a whole variety of other Rishonim. I don't know all the names, but yeah, it's a variety of different peoples.
Exactly. Um, so it's a classic commentary on the Talmud, and it obviously does have a body of successive rabbinical schools. So the one thing that is mentioned here is we're not talking about a case where a father beats his son to death or a teacher beats his pupil to death, or the court, the Sanhedrin administers lashes and that person is beaten to death. The first thing that you've got to bear in mind is that when the court determines that somebody needs corporal punishment for transgressing a negative mitzvah, they do a health assessment taking into account the person's fragility, their age, any extenuating circumstances, and they determine what medically they can take in terms of corporal punishment. That's number one. The other thing is that if somebody soils themselves, that can stop the corporal punishment because they have actually suffered embarrassment. So it even goes that far in terms of restraint. Obviously, we don't see corporal punishment today as being a factor of consideration because we're living in a very, very soft generation. And not even 200 years ago were cases of honor appeased with a duel. In other words, two men that would say that you sullied my reputation would go out and they draw pistols against each other, and one of them would end up dead or severely disfigured. And then before that technology, there were swords, and it was part of standard conduct. Corporal punishment was applied in school, even when we were at Northview. Unfortunately, many of those giving corporal punishment shouldn't have been teachers at all because they took out their frustration. It wasn't an educational tool. It was a stress relief tool that the teachers had because they couldn't control the kids. So part of what makes corporal punishment in the Sanhedrin times doable is it wasn't the person you irritated. Generally, if you put a teacher close to madness, which I did do on many occasions, they were quite happy to break a stick over me because I contributed to their mental illness. But when the court sentences a person to give lashes, that person is well versed in terms of how to administer the lashes, and there's no direct emotional frustration that's conveyed through that process because they haven't been the one that's been aggrieved. Further to which, it's a person that they've determined has been a person of sound restraint and they don't have some sociopathic or psychopathic bent. So that has to be taken into account. We're not talking about the teachers we had at Northview and Highlands and every other dysfunctional school. The other aspect is what we are saying is here with regards, apart from the Sanhedrin distributing lashes, when the Mishnah uses an example of a father or a teacher reproving a child, it generally wasn't with a caning. It was with a nudge on the tuchus or some area. It certainly wasn't a cerebral trauma where they punched the kid in the head. So, but accidents happen. Somebody can slip and they can obviously crack their head open. So what the Gemara here is talking about an example where it went rather bad and a person died. So the Gemara's premise here is with regards to voluntary act and a non-voluntary act. So voluntary act is when you go into an area of the public domain and you create injury, when in fact that act had a degree of risk, especially if it was an area that another person could inhabit. In that particular case, there might not have been gross negligence, but what is deemed a certain amount of negligence is you conducted a potentially hazardous activity in a public domain. A grossly dangerous activity like shooting in the public domain would not allow you to go to exile because it's bordering on the intentional, and therefore you don't get the kapora atonement aspect, nor do you get the protection from the victim's relatives. So what we deem as being an involuntary act is a mitzvah that Hashem has asked you to do a certain activity, and that had odd consequences. It doesn't mean, according to Tosfot, that that's a license to kill or abuse under the guise of almost chinuch for your children or chinuch for your students. So we've got to be or educational tool of convincing. So we've got to be very, very careful there. Does everybody understand the concept of voluntary and why you're not liable to the city of exile versus involuntary? In other words, mitzvah based. Yes or no? Just answer me that. Guys, please. Yes, no, you get it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Now, the
just go over it again briefly, quickly, Damon. Voluntary as in intentional, unintentional. What do you mean by voluntary?
So voluntary means if I decide to go into a forest and start to chop wood, and it's an area where, or you go into a recreational park and you decide to let off fireworks or chop wood or anything that's got a potentially hazardous consequence, and other people are there, then you are liable if that results in a death, because although accidental, there is a degree of risk when other people are allowed to enter. In your private domain, there is no risk because they have no right to enter, and therefore if there's a hazardous activity, you're not expecting anybody to be around. So you're making a decision to go into that area, and that's the definition of voluntary. What's considered involuntary is if, for example, the Gemara is asked, what happens if you go to the forest to chop wood because you need that wood for the schach of the sukkah, or you need to chop wood for the mizbeach to offer into the temple as part of your offerings. When you're in the process of doing a mitzvah, do all mitzvahs have this blanket, since you commanded it's not voluntary and therefore you suspended from having to do time for an inadvertent killing in exile? That's what the Gemara is proposing. Does everybody understand it? That concept. Fine. So we discussed two issues.
Isn't there going to be a timing issue with mitzvahs? I mean, you go in the middle of peak traffic, or you go chop wood in the middle when the whole forest is packed. That's you don't have to do the mitzvah at that time. You can go early in the morning when there's not going to be a lot of people around. Something like that.
Yeah, so look, the reality is we are going to go through issues in terms of increasing probability of risk and accountability as far as that's concerned. Just in general, we're going to go through it in Makkot. But the thing of it is we don't take this into account when you're driving, because if one is driving, most people die during peak traffic because the speeds and the negligence at which takes place, and even if not, there's a blowout of a tire, there's an accident, etc., people don't stop driving. So almost to a certain degree, if they're to look in the olden days at how many people risk their lives in almost a moving weapon, they would be shocked. They'd say, how are people even allowed to drive if they're looking forward? So it's almost an activity condoned as being legal within certain parameters. What are those parameters, Gavin? In driving under a certain speed limit, correct safety distances between cars, roadworthiness of vehicles. I'm just giving you three off the top of my head. You know, in a case where there are mitzvahs where multiple people are dealing with chopping wood, they might turn around and say, well, each one is designated a radius of 40 meters that's the maximum a shard could go. You need to check your axe as you're going into the public area to make sure a third party can check it's secure. I'm just giving you things off the top of my head. Okay, so I think it's a good point. But am I making sense to you, Gavin?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're talking about voluntary versus mitzvah-based, and that affects the level of culpability. If Hashem told you to do something, he told you to do something. But even within that framework, just because you're on the way to run to deliver a person's tefillin, if you're skipping the stop street, you're completely liable. And this was the issue of Acha, by the way, in the Gemara. Aidan, I just want to tell you who Acha was. He was one of the great rabbis. He was the rabbi of Rabbi Meir. He was one of the greatest. And what happened is he saw a child get up on a ladder to separate a mother bird from the chicklets. And there's two mitzvahs there. The mitzvah is his father told him to do it. And the mitzvah for honoring one's mother and father is extended life. Both in this world and the next, and the mitzvah for separating a mother from its chicklets, you know, if you have to move a tree or whatever the case may be, so as not to create anxiety for the mother, is extended life in this world and the next world. Those are the two mitzvahs. So what Acha saw is a boy climbing the ladder, and he died. He fell off the ladder and died. So he became an atheist after that. He said if God could do that and guaranteed long life and this person died, then what sort of God is it? And there was there's some Gemara that said at his end of the life, basically Rabbi Meir davened for his redemption and spiritually pulled him out of Gehinnom, whatever that means, pulled him out of his hell-like state. But what we learn from the Gemara is Rabbi Meir came to an erroneous conclusion. He said, well, doing a mitzvah will protect you, especially one that promises long life. And my golden example is if you on the top of Nelson Mandela Square and a wicked person jumps off Nelson Mandela Square rooftop and a righteous person jumps off Nelson Mandela Square rooftop, what do you think, Aidan, will be the result of both of them?
Absolutely no difference.
Exactly, splat. Splat goes the tzaddik, splat goes the rosha. Exactly, no difference. Because gravity prevails. And when you do something stupid, it says in the beginning of Gemara Brochas, don't think if you're a tzaddik you can toy with a gangster. Because if he puts a bullet in your head, what makes you think you've got you're going to have divine intervention when you do something stupid? Don't toy with gangsters. Don't go into an abandoned building where there are negative spirits or near bodies of water which contain shadim. Don't go in an abandoned building where the bricks can fall. Don't do stupid things, even in the process of doing a mitzvah. The reason why it's a different case in this particular example is, number one, they check for basic negligence, which occurs whether it's voluntary or mitzvah-based. But they're saying, providing that you weren't grossly negligent, but there could be a little degree of negligence, at the point where you're fulfilling a commandment under those ordinances, you're not liable to have your life put on hold by going to the city of refuge or exile. So we're distinguishing between a voluntary act and an involuntary act. Right, that's number one. Number two, we're distinguishing between a public domain and a private domain. Wherever an accident and an inadvertent killing occurs in a private domain, you don't expect anybody to be around, so there's no culpability. If you do something with a degree of negligence, even if it's not grossly negligent, but it could happen that there could be a wood chip from a tree when you're chopping and it could kill somebody, or the axe hand after 30 shots towards the tree might loosen. At that point, you are liable, because where other people have a right to enter, both the perpetrator and the victim, there's a certain degree of culpability because it's a public space. So that was the second part of the Mishnah. The first part of the Mishnah with Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov is, he said, listen, there's a guy throwing a stone. Some idiot throws his head towards the stone path and says, how's it? Haven't seen you for a while. And the guy gets clipped and dies. So in that particular case, you're exempt from exile. Why? Because we're studying this pasuk. And where's that pasuk from? If you look at Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 5, the verse states, or whomever comes with his fellow man into the forest to chop wood, and his hand slipped with an axe as he chopped the tree, or the iron flew from the wood and found his fellow man and he died, he shall flee to one of these cities and live. So this uses this word, and found his fellow man, to mean that a forest is a public place, and find your fellow man is when you're in a forest, when you're in an area where you don't find anybody else and you've checked it out, there's no liability. The minute somebody surprises you, then it's their own fault when a hazardous activity occurs. So we're going to go through the Gemaras and the Mishnas. These are just the points of the actual Mishnah itself. Right, so now that we've dealt with that, and then we're going to be hitting on the actual Gemara itself. Guys, how long do we have left in this particular shiur?
16 minutes.
16. Okay, so I think, I tell you what I'd like to do this time. It started late because I helped a friend of mine do Kaddish, and I actually don't want to go into the whole Gemara. It was sufficing that for two people that have passed away that are important to us, that we did the Mishnah for them. Let's start the Gemara fresh tomorrow. I want you to teach us, Kevin, and let's end off a bit early. I'm sorry for starting late, but we always end off at 7:10, and it's not your fault I started late.
Just one thing, it's quite weird. I heard a share today, just before I go give over what I want to. But a share by Rabbi Joey Haber, he was talking about exactly what we learned the last two, not the previous night and the night before, about even though the homicide was unintentional, there's still no one can be let off scot-free. You've ended someone's life. You've destroyed their future. So there has to be some form of culpability. So he explained it in a very, he's a very good Rav, Joey Haber, American Rav. So it was quite weird that he discussed it this morning when I was listening on my run. Okay, so
just one thing, Kev.
Continuing the theme.
When the Sanhedrin deemed it's a complete accident. In other words, it's groma, it's indirect by 2 or 3 levels, even according to Rebbe is more stringent. And in that particular case, you don't need to have your life turned upside down by going to the city of refuge, because when the Sanhedrin deem it to be an accident, the family's relatives can't kill you for vengeance. So you protect it because they ruled it was an accident. And furthermore, you don't need the atonement, kapora aspects of the city of refuge by having your life put upside down. But Rabbi Joey Harbour did bring a good point, that whenever a Jew dies, the fact that it happened under your watch means there's something spiritually wrong with you, that you were chosen to be the messenger of such an unfortunate act. And therefore, even if you're not obligated to go to the city of refuge, one should definitely take it upon oneself to do a proper personal vidui and atonement, and stay the heck away from the public if you can, because with that sort of klutz behavior or bad karma, just stay the hell away from me and the group. That's a good start. All right, teach us what you're going to do.
Okay, so continuing on the theme of responses during davening. Okay, when we went to say Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. So basically, that is when the
Kev, we've
so
just repeat what you said. You froze.
oh, my connection's also unstable. Can you hear me
Welcome to
now?
South Africa. You see, since you went from Israel to South Africa, what do you expect?
I'm not a horse, but I'm not a horse, but my connection's unstable.
I have no
And
words.
my voice isn't hoarse, so let's continue. Okay.
That's
So,
a hell of a trick.
okay,
All
let me
right.
just start again. Okay, Baruch. So when we respond, Baruch Hu Baruch Shmo, it's usually when the Baal Tefillah, the Chazan, is when he says the words Baruch Atah Hashem, then you say that. So in terms of when one can respond, in terms of where you are in the davening, this is what it says. It can be answered in the middle of a prayer as you are not interrupting a prayer that requires a continuous and focused recital, such as the Amidah. So if you're in the middle of Amidah, definitely not for anything. Then it says, it's usually on, then it only says one other thing here. It's usually answered immediately after saying Baruch Atah Hashem and is not meant to be said in the middle of a personal prayer in the Amidah. So it only says, I would say also, and if you're in the middle of the Shema, you can't say it. It doesn't actually say it here. And if one is in the middle of if you're in the middle of, let's say, not the Amidah, if you're catching up and you're in the middle of a section that ends with a brocha, I wouldn't answer because it's an interruption of sorts. So it doesn't really give any. But then let's go to that's all it actually says here.
Okay.
Then can I continue with with responses to Kedusha, or should I leave that for tomorrow?
I tell you why, leave it because the reason I ended early is because it's not the guys' fault, and they're all expecting to finish
Okay, let's leave that for
at 10
tomorrow.
past. Just
Okay.
one thing I wanted to just end off with is that poor Reuben had two daughters, so they can't obviously do Kaddish. I think Ezra Shur is doing Kaddish on his behalf. But what I do is I do urge Debbie and Abigail to learn as an aliyah for Paul's neshama, which I'm sure they're going to do anyway. And I just wish them condolences. And obviously, I miss my Sensei Mickey Davidow. And I hope Mashiach comes soon and that nobody else dies. And I just wish everybody in the share to be blessed and good things.
Amen.
Right, guys, have a good evening. I know we
Amen.
ended 9 minutes early, but it's not your fault that I had to do this, and I wanted to. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Just thanks.
Thanks.